A hush descended upon the royal residence as Catherine advanced, her tone firm yet undeniably burdened. For months, rumors had trailed Prince Louis, noting his absent grins, subdued behavior, and anxious looks. No mother or father forgets such times, and now, under the media's gaze, Catherine verified tidings that every family dreads imparting, selecting truth instead of hearsay and bravery rather than ease. Her statement struck with force, sending tremors far past the royal gates. The nation paused in suspense, hearts constricting for the young prince, wondering what the medical team had ultimately revealed and how this prognosis would irrevocably alter Louis's future journey. On that morning when stillness overtook the palace, precisely at 8:06 a.m. in London, a hushed declaration shifted the emotional tempo of the whole nation. Mobile devices buzzed in kitchens, on railway platforms, and atop corporate desks as a brief dispatch from Catherine, Princess of Wales, materialized unexpectedly. It lacked fanfare or the usual gentle royal touch, containing only a guarded confession that her youngest son, Prince Louis, had received a diagnosis demanding extended treatment. Within those scant sentences, the chasm separating the monarchy from everyday existence disappeared completely. Well before that instant became public knowledge, the burden of the situation had already taken root within Kensington Palace. Days prior, the hallways had become strangely quiet, as though the very masonry comprehended what approached. Employees who had observed years of royal triumphs and emergencies walked with reduced speed, conversing in hushed tones. This event was neither a political tempest nor a fleeting controversy, it was deeply personal. And the impact was felt by all. Catherine had borne the weight of this decision for weeks, with the resolve to speak stemming not from custom or counselors but from encroachment on all flanks. Skipped events, discreet trips to the infirmary, and unaccounted for departures had started to attract scrutiny. The silence, which once offered shelter, was transforming into a danger, while proposed versions of the announcement cluttered files and desks, revised repeatedly deep into the evening. Every draft grappled with the identical dread of how to convey reality without subjecting a child to lifelong observation. The world would eventually witness only the polished final text. Yet within the residence, the conflict underlying it was painful. William volunteered to shoulder the burden himself, fully aware of the emotional cost it would exact upon his spouse. Catherine declined, maintaining that the communication must originate from her, speaking not in her capacity as a future queen but as a parent. Individuals near her that night witnessed resilience mingled with fatigue, her determination honed by maternal love. Across the rest of the nation, the declaration arrived like an abrupt frost, causing television stations to interrupt their standard schedules. Within moments, presenters on the BBC hesitated mid-phrase, seeking stability, while Sky News completely altered its broadcasting demeanor. In New York and Washington, where darkness still reigned, American channels broke into their programming to share the update. Crowds assembled intuitively outside Kensington Palace, waiting in the chill while their mobile screens continued to illuminate their hands. Many individuals remained speechless, for what impacted the country was not the scarcity of specifics but the sincerity of the restraint shown. There was an absence of clinical jargon, no projected schedule, and no assurance that all would quickly be well. It was simply a lucid declaration of the situation accompanied by a plea for solitude. For the older demographic, it evoked recollections of a past time when Diana's openness demonstrated that royal status does not negate suffering. For the younger audience, it redefined the royal institution as something delicate and fundamentally human. Seated in a modest room adjacent to her personal office, Catherine reviewed the declaration one last time immediately prior to its publication. The early morning light seeped through windows rimmed with ice, capturing her image in the pane. William remained at her side, providing silent comfort when she confessed her trepidation. Her anxiety was not regarding the public response or news banners, but rather concerned her son's path forward. In that specific instant, royal ranks held no significance whatsoever. The schedule for the publication was intentional, authorized just before 8 o'clock to prevent conflict with political agendas and international misunderstanding. At exactly 7:59 a.m., the ultimate approval was granted. By 7 minutes past 8, the narrative had traversed the planet. In that solitary minute, a transformation occurred within the institution. The monarchy ceased to be a concept defined by rituals and became a family confronting precariousness, resembling millions of other households. Prince Louis, recognized by the populace for his animated expressions and spirited vitality, was abruptly the focal point of a narrative no parent wishes to see authored. The Wales family had struggled intensely to maintain the privacy of this situation. And now they requested the globe to withdraw even as it leaned in. It was a delicate equilibrium sustained by faith. Winter still blanketed London on that day. Yet within the royal residence, the atmosphere seemed transformed. The season felt not shattered, but irrevocably modified. The household proceeded discreetly, united by affection and a fresh determination. Throughout the nation, a silent comprehension took hold. Behind the customs and chronicles stood a mother, a father, and a youngster facing tomorrow together. They moved forward one cautious stride at a time. Subtle alterations were silently occurring within the Wales residence, molding a destiny that no one inside could have totally foreseen. Initially, nothing appeared sufficiently amiss to warrant a label. Existence within their home continued with its customary cadence as September waned. Characterized by school routines, sunlit halls, and the mild organization that typically preceded winter. However, amidst that regularity, minute variations slipped in almost without detection. Prince Louis, typically brimming with vigor, began to fatigue more rapidly. Games concluded sooner than usual, and his laughter faded into silence with greater speed. These instances were fleeting and readily rationalized as developmental phases or hectic schedules. But to Catherine, they persisted longer than appropriate. She observed how he slumped into pillows after spending time outdoors. Occasionally, he selected tranquility rather than activity. During a tranquil dinner one night, Louis leaned his head upon William's arm and remained there for a significant duration. William grinned while smoothing the boy's locks, offering comfort with apparent ease. However, Catherine observed the hesitation in his look, and the silence that stretched between them bore a heavy burden. Later, William discussed it softly, dismissing it as mere tiredness. Yet Catherine sensed a slender strand of anxiety constricting within her. By the start of October, caution governed every choice. A clinical consultation was scheduled in London, lacking the standard protocols that accompanied royal transit. There were no public proclamations and no observable changes to security detail. The medical expert was meticulous and composed, behaving neither with alarm nor disregard. Examinations were proposed, trends were identified for observation, and records were to be maintained. Catherine departed with responses that offered no resolution, accompanied by a chilling realization that something fragile had altered. Within Kensington Palace, the shift was perceived before it was comprehended. Staff members detected a hushed tension surrounding the nursery wing. Public events featuring all three children were modified and subsequently decreased. No clarifications ensued, and Catherine maintained her official duties with elegance. Nevertheless, those nearest to her noted how frequently her focus wandered. A cough echoing down the hallway caused her to freeze while speaking. A notification on her device could draw her away from conferences instantly. Even Charlotte appeared to perceive the change, remaining near her brother and grasping his hand as they strolled through the grounds. The incident that eroded Catherine's remaining composure occurred on a standard school morning in the middle of October. Louis paused at the base of the staircase, appearing neither obstinate nor frolicsome, but unsure. His small hand quivered as he attempted to balance himself. Catherine knelt next to him, flattening his sweater and dismissing him with a gentle kiss. Once she was alone, she shut the door to her office and sat amidst the dim morning illumination. Her hands gripped firmly together. When her assistant arrived, Catherine communicated with hushed insistence, requesting that the upcoming series of medical tests be expedited. From that point forward, the palace descended into a more profound quiet. Conferences were relocated behind locked entrances, and commitments were reorganized with rare regularity. Long-standing attendants spoke in whispers, wary of guessing yet unable to overlook the mounting worry. At Windsor, during a modest family reunion, Louis hesitated on the frigid stone stairs while massaging his arm. Princess Anne observed this instantly. Across the patio, Catherine returned her look without disguising the reality. Later, when they were distant from the children, Anne placed a hand on Catherine's shoulder to provide steady support. Catherine's response contained a shudder she could not suppress, for she desired only one outcome. By the beginning of November, secrecy became total. Files were secured with encryption, and alterations to the calendar were concealed within broader agendas. Charles was notified with care, one detail at a time. Camilla received a private briefing, meaning only a tiny group understood the number of medical consultations occurring. Ranks, customs, and ages of etiquette provided no solace against what was gradually becoming evident. Whatever this condition was, it was undeniable. As the winter season drew near, the burden Catherine bore increased in mass. She upheld her poise, kept her family unified, and protected her son fiercely. Meanwhile, the feeling of security she had always depended on silently disintegrated. When the diagnosis ultimately arrived, it did more than merely validate the dread. It signaled the instant when certainty supplanted hope, and the facade of safety dropped away. What remained was only love, determination, and the fortitude to confront what lay ahead. The quiet strength she grasped might unveil secrets concealed within Windsor's icy corridors. Even well-known chambers now felt strangely foreign. The silent reality behind the palace walls settled heavily within Windsor that winter. It was the sort of hush that renders even well-known rooms strange. Outdoors, festive ornaments were silently being erected for the approaching season. Yet inside Catherine's personal sphere, time appeared to halt. The truth she had been preparing for came without alert or ritual. It was delivered not via a telephone conversation or a desperate rap on the door, but through meticulously typed text that held more significance than any proclamation. By the end of November, following days of anticipation and guarded hope, definitiveness took the place of doubt. The clinical results were unambiguous, composed with diligence and expertise. Yet they were impossible to mitigate. Her son Louis possessed a condition that would not vanish with maturity or the passage of time. It was not a matter of life and death, but it was a permanent reality. This truth would mold his daily regimens, choices, and the very cadence of his youth. There was a sense of alleviation concealed within the anxiety, but also sorrow for a future that would now demand unceasing vigilance. Catherine accepted the news silently, regulating her breathing and rejecting the urge to panic. Years spent in the public eye had disciplined her to stay collected even as the earth moved beneath her. William was informed of the reality that same evening, shortly after arriving from London with the chill still attached to his jacket. He did not hasten his response. He perused every sentence, comprehending not just the clinical significance but the ramifications that accompanied it. He foresaw public inquisitiveness, limitless conjecture, and the forfeiture of privacy that pursues any royal difficulty. His comfort was tender but resolute, affirming this was a challenge they would confront together. They would act as parents primarily and as royals secondarily. Nonetheless, the awareness burdened him in a manner that official obligations never had. News travels rapidly within the palace, but only when authorization is granted. Within a few hours, a silent network of confidence was established. A diminutive group was briefed, selected not merely by status but by their ability to keep secrets. Papers were secured, discussions were spoken in code, and timetables were modified to protect the family from needless visibility. This was not concealment for the sake of image, but rather a shield. It provided room to comprehend, to strategize, and to respire. Princess Anne appeared unobtrusively the next morning, providing fortitude without fanfare. She spoke directly, recalling to Catherine that children frequently transcend the anxieties adults cast upon them. Her assurance provided solace, even though doubt remained in other quarters. At Clarence House, the king accepted the news with apparent sorrow. Age and life had instructed him that certain situations cannot be remedied by rhetoric or rank. His worry extended across generations, from his grandson to his son, realizing that William now bore an extra duty that no title could alleviate. Camilla's reaction was similarly measured. There was no tactical planning or debate, only a hushed note of encouragement sent straight to Catherine, devoid of royal maneuvering. As days elapsed, the strain increased behind locked doors. Public agendas were paused, and cameras would eventually detect the modifications. Absences would be noted, and justifications would be required. Catherine confronted an internal conflict regarding how to equilibrate truthfulness with defense. She struggled with how to stay visible while preserving her child's self-respect. The monarchy relies on transparency, yet specific truths demand meticulous timing. Winter, however, possesses a method of revealing what silence attempts to conceal. One night, long after the palace hallways had become vacant, Catherine crept into her son's room. Louis slumbered tranquilly, unaffected by the tempest of worry encircling him. While observing his rhythmic respiration, she realized something profoundly stabilizing. He remained the identical child, inquisitive, intelligent, and cheerful. The diagnosis had not altered his soul, it had merely altered the world's duty towards him. In that still instant, terror yielded to determination. Eventually, the truth would emerge, not as a headline propelled by guesswork, but as a narrative crafted with diligence, honesty, and power. Catherine understood that when the moment arrived, she would face the globe not as an object of pity but as a mother resolved to shield her offspring while accepting reality. The palace might postpone the clamor, but it could not arrest the passage of time. When winter finally removed its mute grip, the truth would be encountered not with frailty but with unwavering bravery. As the castle descended into stillness, hidden strains and secrets began to stir within Windsor's aged masonry. They had never strategized for the silence that pursued the news. It rested upon Windsor Castle like a secondary winter, more burdensome than frost, pushing into the passageways and the stones. Even before a solitary word escaped to the exterior world, the alteration was distinct. Voices were lowered, and the sound of walking became softer. Something delicate had penetrated the core of the palace, and everyone sensed it, long before any official gathering was convened. Agendas were already undergoing revision. A child's name started to vanish from attendance rosters. The household staff detected it initially, followed by the aides, and finally the media team. Patterns rarely remain concealed for long, particularly in a location observed as intently as Windsor. By late autumn, observers were already circling, tracking absences and tallying the days. Inside the residence, secrecy constricted like a bolted gate. The urgent gathering did not commence with ritual, for it had no requirement for such things. In a secluded meeting room seldom utilized except for instances of genuine seriousness, Prince William spoke directly, establishing the mood without theatrics. Protection was the priority, and preparation followed immediately. The king participated via a secure connection, speaking from Clarence House with a cautious stability that suggested extensive experience with family emergencies. Princess Anne's attendance sharpened the atmosphere, her attention locked on ramifications rather than solace. Catherine remained seated and quiet, outwardly calm, absorbing every utterance as if it carried double the weight for her. The medical summary was exact and limited. It detailed continuous observation, intervals of tiredness, and the necessity to minimize strain. Public visibility was to be handled with care. Nothing was voiced casually, as every phrase held consequences that reached far beyond healthcare, affecting school schedules, family vacations, security protocols, and public existence itself. Catherine listened without interjecting, her hands motionless and her eyes cast down, committing every specific to memory. By noon, the palace apparatus was completely active. Preliminary statements emerged, tagged with internal ciphers rather than names. One alternative preferred premature openness, proposing carefully selected words before gossip could expand. Another advised a partial admission, nothing detailed, just sufficient to justify the alterations. The final alternative kept everything in reserve, relying on silence to maintain the boundary. Catherine focused on that last option. The language appeared frigid to her, remote, as though the reality of her child's existence was being diminished through a tactic. When she finally spoke, her tone was soft but rigid. Safeguarding was more significant than stories, and childhood was more important than news banners. Not everyone concurred, as advisors cautioned that delaying bore its own hazards. Unrestrained conjecture could become more vicious than the truth. Anne retorted sharply, reminding the assembly that obligation did not involve nourishing the tabloids. The king advocated for solidarity above all else, cautious of another family narrative spiraling out of control as others had in recent times. No conclusion completely resolved the strain, it merely reorganized it. Later, distant from the gleaming tables and encrypted phones, Catherine stood solitary on her garden terrace. The winter breeze bit at her skin, the hedges were edged with ice, and the estate was unnaturally quiet. When William came to her side, there was no screenplay to adhere to. Uncertainty slipped in before she could prevent it. It was the recognizable guilt of a parent replaying every instance, hunting for overlooked signals. His comfort was tender and solid, yet the burden persisted. Some reflections cannot be dismissed through logic. As November approached its conclusion, arrangements increased silently, educational plans were modified, and medical appointments were charted with exactness. Commitments were cut back or restructured. Even upcoming festivities were toned down into more discreet arrangements. The palace operated with practiced efficiency, but the stress leaked into every niche. Employees discussed a tension that was unrelated to schedules and entirely related to anticipation. Externally, life proceeded. Catherine still assumed public duties, spoke affectionately about early childhood, and grinned under the flashing bulbs. Internally, every appearance exacted an additional toll. Every look directed at her child elicited both solace and dread. Nights extended in length, populated by replayed recollections and unresolved ideas. By the time winter totally possessed Windsor, the primary inquiry had silently shifted. It was no longer concerning what had transpired, but concerning timing and command. It was about how to confront a world that would ultimately require responses. Inside the palace walls, silence endured as both a protector and a weight, restraining a tempest that no one questioned was approaching. Dawn had scarcely removed the cold from Windsor when anxiety took root deep within the residence. It was the variety that comes softly and declines to depart. Catherine was still gripping her teacup when necessity knocked on her morning peace. Distinct and inescapable, by the time Prince William united with her, a solitary piece of paper rested between them. It was light in mass yet heavy with implication. Somewhere outside the palace boundaries, within the tiered systems designed to guard privacy, a delicate fact had slid into the incorrect location at the incorrect time. What made the instance so disturbing was not scandal or treachery, but its mundane nature. No reporter had breached a telephone, and no confidant had vended a secret. Instead, a clerical entry within a hospital database briefly appeared where it ought never to have been viewed. The date, November 29th, sat silently at the header of the document. One phrase, carefully drafted, alluded to continuing medical assessments linked to a ciphered identity. To the majority, it signified nothing, but to one observant administrator, it signified everything. The code pointed to Prince Louis. Inside Catherine's office, voices remained hushed as the inference penetrated. There was no specific diagnosis disclosed and no obvious clarification. There were only sufficient hints to summon hazardous inquisitiveness. William posed the query that was most significant: had the data exited the system? The reply provided solace in language but terror in inflection. A remark had already been uttered. It was a negligent comment regarding how frantically the media might respond. In that split second, the palace comprehended the reality it had long dreaded. Privacy no longer failed with a loud crash, it failed incrementally. By mid-morning, the silent hallways of Windsor teemed with disciplined haste. Telephones trilled, encrypted channels were activated, and councillors gathered. King Charles, despite apparent exhaustion, was adamant about attending the conversations. His voice bore the wisdom and wariness formed by decades of observing whispers evolve into hurricanes. Princess Anne listened with acute concentration, her worry slicing through the chamber. She warned that there were too many systems and excessive points of entry. In a contemporary monarchy, confidentiality had become brittle. From Clarence House, Camilla added her steady voice, advocating for tranquility without negation. Disregarding the circumstance would not cause it to vanish. As the day progressed, collaboration was solicited from the medical facility involved. Dossiers were locked, entry records were audited, and employees were admonished in precise terms regarding their obligation to secrecy. Nevertheless, the palace realized that containment was never assured. By evening, verification came that their apprehensions were well-founded. A tabloid publisher had made contact with a courteous inquiry that barely concealed his purpose. He asked if everything was well with the youngest child of the Prince and Princess of Wales. The editor asserted that rumors were already propagating. The winter sky grew black as William and Catherine stood beside the high windows. The burden of being parents pressed more firmly than royal obligation ever could. Safeguarding their son was more important than controlling news headlines. William spoke with distinctness, although not without distress. They would communicate only when essential, and they would share only the truth that pertained to them. They would not share the aspects of Louis that merited remaining his alone. The subsequent days merged into extended hours and cautious phrasing. Media officials reiterated strict refutations. Advisors composed replies that disclosed nothing yet evaded dishonesty. Every email and every telephone call held tension beneath its exterior. Then, deep into one night, another communication arrived, less understated than the initial one. The publication planned to print the story unless a clarification was provided soon. The menace was unambiguous. Near midnight, fatigue yielded to determination around a silent table. The reality took hold that silence was no longer a shield, it was transforming into a hazard. An envelope lay close by, containing answers too intimate for public viewing. William conceded what neither of them wished to acknowledge. The moment to speak was drawing near. Not by preference but by compulsion. Catherine understood, even before the world was aware, that everything had altered. The secret had not yet fled, but it had advanced close enough to be sensed within the palace. There was no hysteria, only a firm recognition of what waited ahead. Love for a child, duty to a crown, and the delicate boundary between them now stood revealed, waiting for the instant when quiet truth would be forced into the light. The pale December light spilled softly through the tall windows of Windsor Palace, brushing the frost-dusted gardens in a muted glow. Inside, Catherine sat at the edge of her bed, hands folded, breath slow and deliberate, as if bracing herself for something she had long resisted. The house remained unusually still, and even the staff moved quietly, aware of a tension that seemed to hang like fog over the ancient halls. Outside, the world buzzed with speculation, and whispers of concern surrounded a child who had never asked for the spotlight. Inside, Catherine carried the weight of that world quietly, fully, and with a mother's relentless focus. Only hours before, Louis had stirred from a restless sleep, asking if he still had to return to the place with the loud machines. William knelt beside him, brushing back his hair and whispering reassurances that were steady yet strained. Catherine had watched from the doorway, absorbing the courage of her son, the resolve of her husband, and the fragility of the moment itself. It crystallized then that the story of her child would not be dictated by rumors, leaks, or strangers. If the truth was to be told, it would be told by her. By 7 a.m., Catherine was ready, her hair pulled back and face composed, carrying not the veneer of royalty but a deep, unwavering maternal determination. In the private sitting room overlooking the frost-laden gardens, William joined her without a word. No questions were necessary, for certainty shone across her expression. Several drafts prepared overnight by palace aides, full of cautious formalities, were set aside. In their place lay a single handwritten statement that was simple, careful, and hers alone. It spoke of medical evaluation, of hope, of gratitude, and a plea for privacy. There were no dates and no specifics, just the truth shaped with tenderness and precision. Princess Anne arrived shortly afterward, coat still dusted with frost, offering no platitudes but only presence and quiet support. She stated that he would be fine and affirmed that this was the dignified manner to proceed. King Charles appeared next via secure video, framed by winter shadows, his voice gentle. He expressed his pride, though he wished with all his heart she did not have to endure this. Catherine, blinking back tears, responded with steady reassurance. Camilla's voice followed, warm and calm, affirming the simple but profound act of a mother speaking her truth. By 9 a.m., the statement was finalized, almost unchanged from Catherine's original draft. A final moment alone with William preceded its release as they stood together, hands lightly touching near the tall French doors. They watched the garden shimmer while Louis laughed somewhere upstairs, unaware of the storm beyond the palace walls. William whispered that he knew the reaction would not be kind. Catherine replied that she knew, but they would face it together, as truth is easier to bear than rumor. At 9:30, the announcement went public, causing the world to pause, social media to erupt, and newsrooms to scramble. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had confirmed that Prince Louis was undergoing medical evaluation. The announcement was calm, composed, yet devastatingly human. Inside Windsor, the family gathered close, with Catherine kneeling to hold Louis and whispering the truth she had carried for weeks, reminding him that he was loved. In that quiet, fragile moment, a powerful sense of unity settled over them. Titles and crowns meant little here, for love and family were everything. As the world absorbed Catherine's truth, the Wales family stood together, resilient against heartbreak, holding on to hope for the uncertain winter ahead.